Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be here for this session, really digging into the nitty-gritty of data trusts and what's holding them back from being implemented. And I'm joined by a really illustrious panel. So we have Wendy Hall from the University of Southampton, Sylvie Delacroix from the University of Birmingham, and Maria Axente from PwC. Lovely to see you all. So the idea of data trusts really burst into public consciousness thanks to your review, Wendy, on how to grow the AI industry in the UK. And since that, there are many of us in the UK, including at ODI, and also around the world, have been exploring data trusts and the question of how to increase access to data, particularly sensitive data that can both bring these kind of broad benefits and protect people and communities from harms from misuse of data. But in many ways, then, these kind of idea of data trust seems to be an idea rather than a reality. And in this panel, then we want to kind of really explore why that is, and what's holding us back and what we might be able to do in order to move forward. And we only have half an hour before we go kind of private for our Q&A, so we'll try and touch on as much as possible before then, but do join us for the Q&A session immediately after this. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves and hopefully take not too long about defining what you mean by what a data trust is. So Wendy, could you start, please?
Thank you, Jenny. And of course, you're one of the experts in the country on this, so hopefully you'll say something at some point in the panel. Yeah, we picked up the idea of data trust in the AI review, Jerome and I, and the term came from people like Sylvie and Neil Lawrence, so it wasn't, we didn't invent it. But I came to realise after we'd written the review that it didn't mean everything I thought it meant, and the trouble is it means different things to different people. In the review, we talked about it being a legal and ethical framework that you could set up in order to share data, because that was what we saw as an impedance to the development of AI. I have since come to realise that that's very easy to say and much harder to deliver. And as with all things where you have different disciplines coming together, this is a socio-technical thing. And you've got, at the very least, people who understand legal things and people who understand technology. And when you use the word architecture, you could be talking about a legal architecture. What's the legal architecture you're going to use to set up the trust, or the technical architecture? How are you going to set it up technically? And of course, I'd been thinking about it from a technical point of view. And as I talk to the lawyers, I find out all the nuances there are about, I just thought that it was easy. I now found out all the nuances about how the many different ways you could set up a data trust, or as we are increasingly calling them, data sharing agreements or data stewardship arrangements. I should probably stop there, but there's lots. Well, we'll talk later about problems.
Thanks, Wendy. Sylvie, do you want to give us your definition and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Sylvia Lacroix. I'm a professor in law and ethics at the University of Birmingham and a fellow at the Turing Institute and Mozilla. I've been working with Neil Lawrence and other colleagues on the use of trust law to empower groups to pool together the rights they have over their data, and to task a data trustee to act as an intermediary layer between us and the data controllers. Now, we see data trust as one particular tool in a broad landscape of tools that can facilitate data stewardship. And so we see data trust as one way of reconciling the need to share data and to do it better, and on the other hand, the need to address the vulnerabilities that stem from data sharing.
Thank you, Sylvie. Very nicely succinct there. And Maria, please introduce yourself and again, tell us what you think of when you say data trust.
Hello, everyone. It's Maria Axente from PwC. I'm responsible AI lead there, but also at BASE, I'm in fact a transformation consultant. So the way I see data trust is probably a mechanism that allows data sharing, but has three main components: the exchange in themselves, of course, a legal framework to set that up, but also a trust support organization that is, the fact, the operational brain and power behind. And the point I will bring in this conversation is that it's not enough for us to focus on legal and ethical and technology, but also on operational front, and understand who does what, whose ownership data trusts are, and how to make it happen.
Brilliant, thank you. So the main topic for the panel today is what's holding us back from having more data trust being implemented. And I'm going to go to you, Sylvie, first of all. What do you think are the main things? Is it legal kind of environment? Is it technology? Is it funding? Is it people? What is it that's holding us back? Why aren't we seeing more data trusts kind of springing into existence?
Okay, well, rather than jump in directly with a direct answer, I want to say that I think data trust, I see them as an important tool for social change. And when you think of data trust as a tool for social change, then you realize that typically what can stand in the way of social change, or what can slow it down, among those things, there are three things I think that deserve special mention in this case when we consider data trust. And the first problem is people need to identify what the problem is, and to have a sufficient degree of awareness among the population about this problem. And I think here, Cambridge Analytica, the scandal that came from it, was really helpful, but it's far from the end in terms of our efforts to raise awareness of the vulnerability that comes from data sharing and, in fact, data leaking on a daily basis. So that's one problem, identification and awareness. And then the second is that when we then switch to solutions, it's very important that people can meaningfully disagree. So of course, people will disagree about what are the best solutions to this problem. And the challenge we face today is that in order to have a productive discussion and disagreement, you need to avoid talking past each other, basically. And that's been a challenge to some extent because data trust sounds good. Yeah, it's a good PR kind of concept. And because of that, it's been used to refer to very many different things. And because of that, the conversations have been sometimes really muddled. And so I think we're making progress now in identifying the fact that data trusts are one tool among others to facilitate data sharing. So that's the other difficulty is having a dialogue that's productive and constructive and where we talk about the same things. And then the third, I just finished on that, is that once you have identified the problem, you've talked about solutions and you disagree meaningfully, then you need to have a critical mass of diverse actors who take an active interest. And here I am excited because today we have a really impressive variety of people. We have third sector entities like Mozilla Foundation, Luminate, and others who are taking an active interest in data trust. Then we have regulators of various kinds, academics, and private actors like, say, Element AI, who are also showing an interest in the concept. And so I think we might well be reaching this time when the type of change that can be facilitated by data trust might happen. But so to get to your short answer to your question, it's not tech, it's not law that's stopping us, it's actually us, people. We need to get better at disagreeing meaningfully and come up with constructive solutions to a problem that more and more of us are aware of.
Thanks, Sylvie. Yeah, certainly in the work that we did at ODI when we first started digging into the term data trust, found like 18 different definitions, people talking about it in very, very different ways. And that's one of the reasons why we've started talking about data institutions as that kind of structured entity for sitting in the middle, recognizing that there's lots of different types of those, and I
think that's really actually these term data institutions have been really helpful because it encompasses a variety of tools, and so it's really important. Yeah.
Thanks, Sylvie. Maria, what's your perspective? What do you think is holding things back? You mentioned operational aspects earlier on.
I agree with Sylvie that it's a people problem, and I think we can debug this people problem in three different directions. First, I think it's a problem of vision and concept. The fact that we have so many use cases, but we need to focus our attention on the ones that matter, right? So what I would say about vision is that we basically have two directions we can focus. One is a micro level, organizational level, where we can see what use cases are suitable for a solution that we call data trust, and keep in mind that there are many other solutions for data sharing and data access. So therefore, it is really important, as Sylvie said, for us to define the problem. But also there is a macro level vision for the data trust that could be enhanced with the help of the government. When we start looking at mission-driven objectives, and we see how can we use data trust, for example, to boost innovation and economic growth. The second point is it's about ownership and leadership. So even when we decide what the vision is who's going to own it, who's going to drive it forward, and what resources do we allocate? Because as we've discussed earlier, and as your report, Jeni, suggested, data trust is part of the data architecture. The problem with this categorization is that you bury the concept somewhere down the huge technology ecosystem that could deliver an outcome, and therefore it's difficult for business owners to see the impact data trust will have in delivering value. And that leads me to obviously the operational aspect, which is about roles and responsibilities, and how do we work together, knowing that we need to involve legal experts, technology experts, ethics experts, but also organizational experts to allow us to see how we can drive this forward. And obviously, from an operational perspective, we also need to define very clear what's the value that data trust delivers. But also the roadmap, right? And who's in charge for that roadmap and that action plan, so that we have deliverables over a period of time.
Lovely, thank you, Maria. And Wendy, what's your opinion?
Well, a lot of what I might have said, as Sylvie and Maria have already covered, because this is a very complex issue. That's the trouble, and different people take it in different ways, and it's very much about. It reminds me of what we were doing when we started the whole web science movement. You have to learn other people's vocabularies. You have to, and I think at the technical layer, I said, there's the legal and ethical layer, but then you've got there's, as Maria said, the issue of when you talk to the people, the chief execs of the companies, they agree in principle, but then when they realize what they're talking about in practice, there's several issues, and they're mainly people issues. There's things like data curation. A lot of people, when they say they want to share their data because they want to get the benefits of what they think a data trust is, and they may have a different idea to what you have, but then they realize that there's a cost to sharing their data in terms of data curation. Who's going to do that? And this is a cost that's going to be incurred forever, potentially. If you're going to make a data set available to other people, then you've got to keep that data set, if it's not a historical one, if it's a growing one, then you've got to keep that growing, and yet they're worried about, it's almost like what they're doing, their dirty washing in public. Yeah, it has gaps, it's messy, people leave the job, and who's picked up that data in that data set, and who's managing the quality. There's an awful lot of really basic issues you've got to sort out. I mean, even the issue of saying to someone, we want, we'd like an agreement to share in principle data from the city council to the university. I talk about, because that's on my mind today. Can we have a catalogue of what data you've got? And even getting that's without even getting to the data is really, really difficult. And scoping what the purpose of your trust is, what your data institution is, what the governance going to be. These issues are so new to everybody and so hard to explain sometimes. But it does come down to people do hug their data to themselves, and it's partly because they're embarrassed about releasing it. You must have had this endlessly in your world, Jeni.
Yeah, I was going to say the challenges of getting organisations to share data individually are things that are very, very familiar in the kind of open data movement, where you know, we're very used to organizations hugging it because they're concerned about what other people might see. So that kind of transparency aspect, but they're also concerned about what other organizations might do and how they might not be able to capture the value from the data that is theirs. And so I found it really interesting listening to all three of you. There were some aspects that you were talking about which were about like individual example data sharing agreements or data institutions or data trusts, and what kind of holds those back. But then there was this other kind of set of issues which was much more at the how do we build this field and how do we make the data trust or data institution or data stewardship kind of community come together to be working together. And Maria, I was really interested in what you were saying around leadership and the need for a vision around this. Where do you think that should be coming from? Who do you expect to kind of step up and provide that?
I think the government is in a very good position to do this, to be honest. And we need to think of how do we manage this, not like a one-off, like more of a setting up an institution, some legal and operational structure that will allow us to benefit from setting it up once and running it many times. And as I said before, I think with the vision, we need to be very clear and demonstrate the value, right? So the government is sitting and so much valuable data that could boost innovation by allowing access a startup to that data. But because it's still a complex concept that will trigger even more complexity around data architecture and access, we need to be very clear of how do we develop it in a way that does not increase significantly that complexity, but delivers value. So I would say that in my mind is be the government to help us lead in this space and demonstrate how this could grow, and also have a long-term vision, because, you know, thinking in short sequences, we might not be able to see the benefits. So I think we need a bit of a master plan. So you know, having the data trust as a concept part of the Wendy's report, and you know, one way or another add to the grand challenges, I think it gives us the best entry to say, but data trust should be a strategic initiative, not only operational.
It's really interesting, and what I'm struck there by is that you know, Sylvie, your Neil's vision of what the kind of architecture looks like is a whole internet architecture type of vision, right? It requires a complete kind of re-architecting of the way that we interact with big tech services. So do you agree that it's government should be stepping forward to create that vision, or do you see it a bit more distributed way?
Thanks, Jeni. Yeah, so I was keen to jump in, so this is great. So I think we have to distinguish between two very important different things, right? So on one hand, we do need tools to empower organizations to better share data and to share it responsibly. That is a no-brainer. It needs to happen. I think it's slowly happening. And yes, it would make sense to create frameworks, whether it's a repeatable framework of terms and conditions, to make this easier. Yeah, and to make this easier, especially for smaller organizations that don't have huge legal teams. So that is one tool, which is really a horizontal tool. It's about facilitating better data sharing between organizations. I know that it has been called a data trust. I think that it's better referred to as a data stewardship mechanism, because actually it doesn't need trust law at all, right? So, but that's for a different conversation. Aside from these horizontal mechanisms, what we also need, and I think people are slowly waking up to that, is bottom-up empowerment mechanism. So it's all very important to have top-down intervention from the government to give us rights, for instance, like the rights we have from the GDPR. But at the moment, very few people are aware of those rights, and very few, even less, are capable of exercising them. And even if we exercise those rights, the imbalance of power between us data subjects and them, the data controllers, is such that it's actually a very skewed model. And so data trust come to say, look, it's time we empower groups of people to get together and put their rights together so that they have a chance to negotiate with, say, big providers like Google, etc., and negotiate better terms and conditions or monitor data sharing agreements. So these are two different tools, and it's really important to distinguish them. And I think for horizontal agreements, yes, the government could play a leadership role. I think so. But for bottom-up empowerment structures, I don't think the solution is going to come from the government. It may help by, for instance, making some rights mandatable. That would be nice. But at the end of the day, what can help bottom-up empowerment structures? Well, it's us. And that means not just us speaking, but you listening as well. So that's important to understand that distinction.
Lovely. Wendy, what do you think? Where do you think the responsibility lies? Right?
So I want to pick up on Sylvie first, and then I'll come back to what Marie said. I think it's Sylvie's really clearly just talked, and I've had tutorials from Sylvie on this. The difference between enabling organisations to share data, which I find really fascinating because it's not trivial, and we really need to help people do that. And the more community-based, really helping people protect their own data, which is what Neil and Sylvie and people conceived of originally with the data trust and using trust law. And they both have their places. This is, but I with the latter one, I see Tim Berners-Lee with Inrupt and the solid architecture as a marriage made in heaven with the sort of data trust, because this is his idea of giving people, well, many people have had the idea, he's trying to make it happen, of putting data, giving you your own sense of what your data is, and then Sylvie's, that you have ownership of it and you decide who you share it with. And Sylvie's point is that if people collectively need to come together to actually get the change we need to give us the power back over our data, and there's so I think that's an amazing vision, and I'm in awe of people that are trying to progress that. But in terms of the practical today, letting organisations share data, which is what we were really talking about in the AI review, not only, but that was what I don't think it's all. I mean, Marie's answer is governance. The government can lead, and I think that's what we did with the AI review. Is we put data trust as sorry, Sylvie, we used that term, but we put it as the #1 recommendation in the AI review. But we haven't put enough support behind that, and that's what I'm urging with the AI through the AI Council and the Office for AI, because I know that Jeni, you work with them to get your pilot projects going, and we need a lot more of that. We need help to build user case studies, and I think that's what government can do, so that we can show people will learn by doing and by seeing what other people are doing. And we need to put more money into that sector for the government to lead and think about the regulation that's required. But actually, it's also, we've got to get on and do some case studies, like you're doing it with the Insight project. There we are.
Yeah, so my reflection on that is that government can fund some case studies, but we also need to have funding from other sources in order to get some of those case studies going. So, we've been working on the Insight Data Hub that's funded by HDR UK, Health Data Research UK, but also Microsoft is actually, we've gone into a partnership with them, and part of what they're funding is a whole set of examples of data collaboration. So in my perspective, getting those examples going, and looking at what the kind of lessons from them are is how we kind of move on in a very practical kind of way. I think we've only got a few minutes left, so on this panel kind of piece, and then we're going to go over and have in a separate place have a Q&A discussion for questions that have come from the audience. So just to kind of wrap us up and final words, Sylvie, starting with you, what's your kind of brief tweetable soundbite for what needs to be done next to really advance work on data trusts or data institutions, whichever you like?
Okay. Well, what we need, and here I'm talking to you, people who are hopefully listening, what we need is initiatives from groups of people, people who are intrigued by the idea of data trust and who want to get together and create these new bottom-up initiatives. Then please get in touch, because we are very keen to get on creating pilots of bottom-up empowerment structures like this. So what we need is you, us, basically, not fancy tech and not the legal tools. They are there. What we need is initiatives.
Thank you. Maria.
Yes, I think what I had in mind is maybe that we need to identify some problems where data trust can make a big difference. You know, in terms of data sharing or use or access to data or training the models, there's so many other technical solutions that exist. So how could data trust can make a difference on the specific problems, because that's all about ultimately. So we're trying to solve some problems with the help of technology, not the other way around. I think we need to stay clear from tech solutionism, even in this case.
Thanks. Wendy?
I agree with that. I love the way Sylvie just says, oh, we've got the legal stuff and let's not worry about the technical. And she's quite right in what she's trying to do, but these are not trivial, right?
No.
So I would just say what we need are national projects, I think, to get everyone together. And national, so no, this is not centralization of everything, but lots and lots of people are collecting data about COVID, from very deep medical data through to, you know, how many beds were there in that hospital at that time, and all the, and a lot of those have been done under emergency acts, and we need to be able to keep that data and people to pore over it for months, years to come. And so that's an example of where government can lead in terms of building some sort of data institution around that. And the other thing that I'm getting increasingly interested in is the National Digital Twin Project. There's a huge data institutions, I'm going to try and keep calling them that, Jeni, are really needed to make that work, because you can't do a digital twin of any sort or a set of an ecosystem of digital twins without this type of mechanism, which would include everything we've been talking about here. So
excellent. Well, thank you all so much for this discussion. We're going to wrap up this kind of public piece now, and then we'll be heading over and having a bit more discussion with your questions in just a minute. Jess?
Yeah, I just think that was so fantastic, and I really hope that everyone joins in the Q&A if you can, and otherwise sticks around later on for the rest of the afternoon, where we have some more fascinating discussions about AI and about ethics, and particularly looking at the way that all of the coronavirus data fits in with the Sustainable Development Goals. So please do have a fantastic lunch, have a great break, and then join us later on from 2 p.m. on the ethics stage. Thanks.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.